we got done talking about patterns, and we were like, how are we going to talk about ours? And so we just got to talking, and it's hard to separate ours, so we just kept going. We just kept talking about it. So we thought, well, since we're sitting here talking about it, we might as well video camera it and just see what comes out of it. Nothing might come out of it. We might find some clips out of it. Who knows?
But what the 3 R's that we're talking about, there's reposition, there's retrain, and then there's restore. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to that restored component of it. But when we sit there and talk about what is, repositioning is putting you in a new position. Retraining is trying to train you to stay in that quote-unquote position, and the end result is restoring or making sure that is re-ingrained into your brain, if you will, so you're not repeatedly having to do these exercises or activities.
So what we're calling is, what we do is called Postural Restoration, right? So that's part of the Postural Restoration Institute, right? We can link that stuff if we get there, but we're trying to restore. What does that mean? So we've kind of defined that thing, but we know that there's a pattern, we know that there's positions, we know there's postures that people get into, and we know that they're inherently asymmetrical, and we haven't really gotten into that specifics, but that's what's going on. And so people who know postural restoration repair know that we're really interested in this asymmetry, and that's the pattern that shows up. So the first step when we're trying to reposition is try to put somebody back in a position where they're more balanced between their two sides.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean symmetrical. So we got into the topic of, hey, we're not trying to get people symmetrical, and that's something.
And you had just brought up Usain Bolt. When he runs very asymmetrical. He doesn't look very efficient. He's
got a strong pattern of how he runs. That's
Correct.
A little bit imbalanced between his two sides, and I've seen some research. It's like 54% on his right side and 46% on his left side. And for stance time, it's imbalanced, and it kind of follows some of the patterns that we see. But he was very efficient, obviously very fast. Never really had any issues with injuries. So it's a matter of the debate is that something that we should be treating, or that we're worried about is a bad thing, or not?
Or even in athletics, we're talking about corrective exercises or doing something prior to doing a workout or going out and lifting weights, that you should be doing certain activities to do things, and it's not a bad thing, but it's at the end of the day, can you get out of that pattern or position, if you will, the bad position, to make it a better position? It's kind of like what we call alternating, reciprocating motion.
Yeah. Which is the retraining. Can you train yourself to do a pattern
on both sides
and not get stuck in one or the other? And that's that repetition point of retraining. So how do you tease out retraining and restoring and repositioning, because they all kind of meld together. Mm-hmm. So it's a more of a nuanced conversation than, well, here's what a pattern and a position and a posture is. So we were talking about R's, right? And I think the bigger part of the R's is not just the R, but the E next to the R. It's the re. We're restoring. We're going back to a different position. We're repositioning. We're retraining. We're doing it again and again and again, so that you don't get stuck in one specific spot. If you're just positioned or in a posture or in a pattern and you never got out of it,
or you don't know what to do with it,
or you don't know what to do with it or how to manage it, that's when you run into problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit more nuanced discussion. But the ultimate goal again is, if you don't have that initial foundation of a pattern and a posture and the position that you're in, you're guessing how you're going to retrain or restore somebody. Mm-hmm. You're just throwing darts at a board and hoping something.
Well, you got to recognize it. You got to recognize the position. You got to recognize the pattern, and you got to recognize the posture. And your posture, basically, if you think about the whole thing, it's kind of like your default pattern. It's what you're going to fall back into.
The big part about these R's is how do we get out of a pattern and out of a position. And
well, like you said, we're going back. We're going back to
a good one, because we're going to leave it again, because you're going to go back into your pattern, and you got to be able to restore or reposition back into something on the other side or in a different position.
Or it's kind of like the old-fashioned redo.
Our goal isn't symmetry. Our goal isn't to make everything exactly the same on both sides. The goal is, we look at objective tests, and when we see things that are similar on both sides, you have access on both sides. Hey, we're happy with that, but that's not the goal. That's the first step of, hey, we have access now to make it to lots of different positions and patterns.
And there could be, flip the coin around, there could be somebody that's totally symmetrical, and there's a pattern that we'll talk about in the future that may be symmetrical on both sides. They may be limited in certain things, but they're doing totally fine with what they're doing. They don't have any issues.
Yeah.
So sometimes, but then there's people that have issues they shouldn't have issues.
Yeah. And so so many people, when we see people that come in from other therapists, that they're neutral, they're in the middle, they're repositioned, but they still don't feel good.
Yeah.
Because they haven't fully been retrained and restored how to live without relying on the old pattern that's still there.
Well, like we've always said, getting somebody neutral is just a start of treatment. You're getting them into a new position.
Yeah, you gave them all the tools.
But they still don't know how to utilize that new position or recognize their brain doesn't know
That's
how
the
to
retrain.
train. And then ultimately the end product is your restore.
Yeah. Now you got lots of options.
Now you got all your plumbing working.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how much that'll work or what will even cut, but I think instead of trying to really separate out all those R's,
Put them together.
just put them together because it's going to be nuanced. Now, when we get doing other videos, we'll say, well, this kind of activity,
Reposition exercise.
the main purpose of this activity would be to help reposition somebody. We're going to take one position of a bone and we're going to reposition it. Say we tuck a pelvis underneath. Well, if you understand the posture that belongs to and the pattern that's part of, you'll be able to predict everything else that goes on.
Is a position, so you could talk about I think I talked about it, I don't know, I haven't looked at it. You can reposition the pelvis or you can reposition the rib cage. So you could do
as long as
a
you know
left
that's part of that
hamstring,
pattern,
you could do a
you're
left
good.
hamstring, or you could do a balloon, and that's what we're trying, so we just put it together.
And that would be a repositioning activity.
I think the retraining, where the R's get tough is like when you start doing the standing dynamic, that's where I think people struggle, it's like putting that all together. You can reposition, you can do glute max exercise, you can do
You can
ab
reposition with a cotton ball in your nose,
Yeah,
right? I mean, there's so many ways to reposition, but does that mean you're retraining or you're restoring activity? So then there'd be activities that'll be retraining. Hey, this would be a good activity to do to learn a new movement pattern. I think that's more of a retraining. And then the goal would be to restore. You say, hey, you should be able to go for a hike in the mountains or do Tai Chi class or whatever, and that would
If you really think about it, just
that would be
all those activities are repositioning
Yeah.
exercises to a certain extent, because if the body's willing to
assume that position.
assume
You're
that position,
repositioning.
you're putting them in a new position.
Yeah.
And so it's just whether or not how elementary it is or complex it is. Some people can tolerate more complex.
Things off the bat, so people can't.
Yes.
I would guess, like I said, I consider repositioning giving you access. I'm giving you access to new positions, for new patterns, or new movement things that you can do. Unless you have access to them, it's hard to train it if you don't have access to it. Once you have access to it, then we can train it. So anyway,
All right. Well, we got enough.
there's a
How
whole
long
bunch
is
of
that?
whole bunch of
Hopefully
stuff.
hit record.